Well, listen to the science. It's what they tell us, isn't it? Or well, it's what Hollywood celebrities tell us. Emma Thompson and her cronies in Hollywood, Harrison Ford, we've heard them all say the same thing. Listen to the science. We've even heard that weird little pixie from Sweden telling us to listen to the science. But of course we don't, do we? We don't. And neither does mainstream media. They only listen to what they want to hear. Now, we haven't had a senior politician in the West, I don't think, who was a scientist since Maggie Thatcher in the 80s, who was a chemist, of course. And she read chemistry at Oxford. So she was the last scientist, I think, that we had in a senior opinion. Most of our politicians read art subjects, PPE and all that kind of stuff, or classics, so on and so forth, which doesn't really make them particularly fit for leadership and government, sadly. But worse than that, they don't know how to interpret data. And this is one of the major problems. So they don't know how to assess science and scientific reports. And they get like a rabbit in the headlights. Oh, it's science. Oh, he's a scientist. We're listening to scientific papers. And we must do exactly as we're told because we're too frightened and too ignorant to actually drill down a little bit and find out what the science is actually saying. And if it doesn't fit the mainstream game, we'll ignore it, won't we? So it doesn't matter, we've just learnt a lot about this from the COVID malarkey, where the science is warped and perverted and has ground the country to a halt, and very slowly, as I said it would, it's now being worked out that of course it's bogus, a lot of the tests are bogus, the interpretation of statistics is bogus, and when it comes to the coronavirus thing, what was interesting is if you want to change the statistics because people are lazy and slovenly and don't look into things very deeply, all they did was change the word died of to died with. Just a little tiny word, wasn't it? Moving of to with. And so if you look at the numbers from of, it's about 1,700 of fit and healthy people. And if you look across to with some fairly dodgy number dealing on death certificates, it turns into 40,000. Of to with. Very easy. And we're beginning to see the same thing now coming forward and have done for some time actually in climate change. This climate change business, it used to be global warming. And of course global warming is unsustainable now as a hypothesis. It's clearly not happening. They've been saying it's going to happen for 20 years, so it's been changed to climate change. And of course we've been waiting for 20 years. And again, it's a very fashionable thing. It's green politics. It's very fashionable. So when you have beta males who run this country, and like David Cameron and Boris Johnson, green politics is fashionable. It's all extremely fashionable, and it's internationally fashionable to be very green. So nobody votes green, of course, because they actually want cheaper electricity and they want to get on with their lives. But it's very fashionable amongst the middle classes. And so this is what they go for. And beware, we're going to see a lot more of this in the future. But the science, of course, which you've been told is settled, is not settled. All these books, and I've got lots more in my archive library, I've just brought these in to sort of show you, have been written by internationally acclaimed independent scientists, not paid by government or paid by the academic world, which is paid for also by government via grants and so on and so forth. These are real scientists, and they don't buy into the hypothesis. They argue against the hypothesis. Now, I'm not suggesting here today in this clip to tell you that one system is good or one system is bad, that man-made carbon dioxide is going to boil the planet or not boil the planet. What I'm here to say and draw your attention to is that we're not having a scientific debate. Dissent isn't allowed. It wasn't allowed in coronavirus, it's still not. Dissent that lockdown doesn't work, that the tests don't work, that is simply verboten on mainstream media. You can't go on and say that. And when it comes to climate change, you cannot dissent from the received establishment position that man-made carbon dioxide is going to boil us all to death and will be an absolute disaster. And the hypothesis actually gets weaker and weaker. And the BBC got rid of their real scientists like Dr. David Bellamy and Johnny Ball and people like that to replace them with activists like Roger Harabin and his ilk, who will go along with the emotion, not the science. So when all this business about listen to the science, we're not listening to the science. We're not listening to it. We're only listening to one small group of scientists and their hypothesis. We should be taking a much broader spectrum of debate, and we're not. And this is coming down the road very quickly. We're hearing Dominic Raab talking to Joe Biden and the Prime Minister saying, well, the next big thing is going to be climate change and doing something about climate change. This is going to be very expensive for you. Unbelievably expensive, this net zero carbon business, especially if you're working class or on minimum wages or an old age pensioner. It's going to be extremely expensive. It's not going to affect the middle class and the people in the public sector. They're already getting plenty of money. The banks are loving it. The banks are really drooling over this because there's going to be carbon taxes, going to be carbon offsets. So your BlackRock, your Goldman Sachs are really going with this. And of course the fashion is carried forward by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, who doesn't actually know anything about science at all. He's listening to the pressure groups that get at him. And when I listened to him at the European Parliament a little while ago, he was giving a talk 5, 6, 7 years ago when he gave us 6 months to live. And we weren't allowed to challenge him. We weren't allowed to challenge him. Nobody was allowed to say, excuse me, Your Royal Highness, where are your figures coming from? Where are your stats? Why are you taking this view? But he's now joining this whole momentum of globalism and new systems to screw ordinary people with expensive electricity on bogus statistics and bogus facts. And it's all here in so many books you can get, and they're not allowed on mainstream media. Professor Ian Plimer and people like that, the real cost of wind turbines and all the rest of it. We are being screwed, and it's the same people that are screwing us today will be screwing us in the future over this bogus climate change nonsense. I urge you to try and encourage whoever your MP is, encourage him to facilitate debate. That's all I'm asking for. That's all I'm asking for before we go into this net zero business. An open debate on TV. Now, we had a big open debate on Brexit, and that's what we should have. We'd have months and months of an open debate, and both sides equally represented. The sceptics on man-made and people who believe it's solar-based climate change. Nobody denies climate change, all right? Nobody denies that. I don't know anybody who denies climate change. We know that climate is changing, and it's always changing. We know that. It's the reasons that are in dispute. And dissent has not been allowed. And before we go into this very expensive net zero game, we must have an open debate before it's too late. Before it's too late. So I urge you to motivate yourself to do this. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based. And I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.